really wanna know, then come on, let's go. Take a stroll down those...
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another edition of the Country Roads Webcast, brought to you by Trio 4 Productions. As always, I'm your host, Jordan Cruz. We've got a really great preview show coming for you today. We're going to be joined later on for an interview by Spencer Rogers of the 23 Personnel podcast, covering all things Texas Tech athletics, and going to get a little bit more insight into the Texas Tech program as we get set to preview the upcoming game between the 12th ranked Mountaineers and the 25th ranked Texas Tech Red Raiders. I think it's going to be a good barometer game for both teams to see where they're at, as Texas Tech's coming into this game with a lot of momentum, now sitting at 3-1 on the season and haven't lost since true freshman quarterback Alan Bowman took over as their starter. They've won 3 straight, as I mentioned, and their last win was a big-time one as they went on the road into Stillwater, Oklahoma, and beat Oklahoma State, a 15th ranked Oklahoma State team, pretty handily, 41-17. And their defense looked impressive in that game as well, not just the offenses. Texas Tech is traditionally known for is their defense actually held Oklahoma State scoreless in that second half, and Oklahoma State actually didn't have a single passing yard in that second half. So Texas Tech's coming into this game riding high, and West Virginia is as well, as they are undefeated. And I think it's going to be a good test for both teams. A good test for West Virginia's defense, which currently sits ranked number 1 in the Big 12 in points per game allowed. They're only allowing 12.3 points per game, as well as first in the Big 12 in total defense, as they're only giving up 304 yards per game total defense, going up against a Texas Tech offense that currently ranks number 1 in the nation in total offense. So kind of a matchup of wheels there, and we'll see which one gives in this game coming up on Saturday. And I look forward to our interview with Spencer from the 23 Personnel podcast to get a little bit more insight into Texas Tech and get a little bit deeper into this preview coming up later, so stay tuned for that. That being said, before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about what you can expect to see from this Texas Tech team. They're still head coached by Cliff Kingsbury, who's now in his 6th season, I believe, and then he calls the plays on offense as well. He does have a offense coordinator there in Kevin Johns, who they brought in, and he's really kind of revitalized the run game, brought in some new concepts there, a lot of misdirection things they do, and their run game has really improved because of it, and their offense is a lot more balanced this season, as they've gotten a lot more rushing touchdowns so far than in years past, and a little bit different look to their offense, especially as far as the run game is concerned. On defense, their defense coordinator is still David Gibbs, and I mentioned their defense is much improved. It was much improved last season, and he's done a good job turning around that program, and it's starting to pay off for Texas Tech, having that continuity and having him be able to get the players he needs in there and have his system in place for a while now, and you're seeing Texas Tech's defense be better, a lot better than it has in years past. I mentioned that Texas Tech's offense sits top in the country in total offense in yards per game, as they're averaging 623.5 yards per game, as well as in passing offense, where they're averaging 435.8 passing yards per game. And that's kind of the norm for Texas Tech. You always see them up there in those numbers in total yardage wise and in passing offense. But the one number that kind of sticks out to me for their offense so far is in time of possession, where they're currently ranked 5th in the country and actually number 1 among all Power 5 teams, possessing the ball on average 36 out of the 60 minutes of the game. So they've really done a good job of using that balance to kind of control the ball more and control the clock more, and try and control the game and not move at such a breakneck pace. And that's really helped their offense a lot, is possessing the ball more. And you've seen that against Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State didn't have the ball hardly any in that game, and Texas Tech, once they got the lead, sat on it and was very efficient and scored points, but it also took time off the clock and didn't give Oklahoma State any chance to come back. So I think that's another area where their offense has progressed, and it looks even better so far this year. On offense at the quarterback position, as I previously mentioned, they are led by a true freshman quarterback in Alan Bowman, and he took over after their previous starter, McLean Carter, went down with an injury. in their season opening game versus Ole Miss. And ever since then, their offense has been red hot. 3-0 with him in games that he has started. And he also is number 1 in the country in pass yards per game at 389.2, and 3rd in the country in total offense per game at 387.3. So he's been very impressive, especially for a true freshman. They're full of playmaking receivers, and the receivers have a lot of height, as they have a 6'6" sophomore in TJ Vasher, who I think a lot of West Virginia fans will remember because he had a big game against the Mountaineers last season in 2017. And the guy that's really made a lot of plays for them this year, though, is 6'5" junior Antoine Wesley, and he currently ranks number 2 in the country in receiving yards at 511, as well as 2nd in the country in receiving yards per game with 127.8. They've also seen pretty good success in the run game this year, as they've racked up a good amount of rushing touchdowns. I think a lot of that credit goes to Kevin Johns, as I previously mentioned. Bringing him in, he's kind of revitalized this run game and given it some new concepts. And they're kind of led by a 3-headed monster there, and DeMarcus Felton, and then 2 freshmen in Sir Roderick Thompson and Tajon Henry, who both have had good games this season, and you've seen a lot of balance from them between those 3 guys, and all 3 have the potential to have a good game on any given Saturday. Defensively, I think the continuity of having David Gibbs there for a few years now is really starting to pay off for them. As you've seen this year, that they can continue that steady improvement that they've been having, as they currently sit number 2 in the Big 12 in third down defense, only allowing opponents to convert 27.9% of their attempts. And their defense was actually bolstered last game by the return of their senior safety, Jashawn Johnson. And you've seen their secondary play better than they have all season in that game that he came back, and I think he's a big piece of the puzzle for them. And then also at corner, they've had a lot of success out of true freshman Adrian Fry, who actually has 3 interceptions in the first 4 games rather. And then also DeMarcus Fields has lockdown potential at that corner spot. So you've seen an improved Texas Tech defense, especially in the secondary with the return of Deshaun Johnson and a couple good corners in those guys. And the senior leader on that defense is still there in Dakota Allen, the linebacker, who currently leads the team in tackles. And they also have another good linebacker in Jordan Brooks. So this Texas Tech defense is not as porous as the one that we've seen in years past when we faced them. And I think that they've steadily improved there, and they were bolstered last week by the return of Deshaun Johnson, and their secondary is even better than it has been all season now at this point. So that's just kind of a brief summary of what you can expect to see from this Texas Tech team and what they've done up to this point this season. And we're getting ready to get a little bit more insight into this Texas Tech team and get a little bit deeper into the preview of this game, as we're getting set to be joined by Spencer of the 23 Personnel podcast covering Texas Tech football down there in Lubbock. So great interview coming up. Stay tuned to the Country Roads Webcast. Alright, we are joined here on the Country Roads Webcast by Spencer of the 23 Personnel podcast, covering all things Texas Tech athletics down there in Lubbock. How you doing tonight, Spencer?
Doing pretty well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, no problem. Appreciate you coming on the show. Let's kick this thing off talking about these coaches of these 2 programs. Dana Holgorsen and Cliff Kingsbury, I think we all know that they kind of know each other well. They've worked together. Kingsbury was a quarterback when Dana Holgorsen was on the staff there at Texas Tech, and also Cliff Kingsbury took over the offense coordinator duties at Houston once Holgorsen left there in 2009. And, besides those 2 facts, I'd see some similarities between the 2, as they've kind of had next to no coaching experiences when they took over as head coach of these 2 respective programs. And I know in Coach Holgorsen's case, we've seen him kind of learn on the fly and really adapt and show willingness to change philosophies and become better at game management and other minute details in recent years that he probably kind of failed to pay much attention to early on in his tenure. And I think he's become more of a complete head coach now, and it's led to a more complete team and more successful team at West Virginia in recent seasons. How have you seen Coach Cliff Kingsbury grow and adapt as a head coach, and as he's also had to kind of learn as he goes along? And have you seen him become more of a complete head coach and show positive progress?
Yeah, it's been something that we've all been trying to find some progress. I guess it wasn't until this past season when he really started to be hands off and start to turn the defense, or sorry, not with the defense, but with the offense, being able to bring in an offensive coordinator that really changes how Texas Tech and their offense looked at running the ball. He was really just out of the gate, because of his very little experience, surrounded himself with more so friends and guys that he knew rather than coaches that really should have been in that position. So he was a little handicapped going into it. It was some growing pains as he's had to fire basically everybody from that initial staff and build where he's got. But currently, he's got an offensive coordinator, Kevin Johns, and not that Kingsbury isn't calling the plays on offense now, but the change in the running game philosophy this season is definitely coming from Coach Johns. There's a quote actually from, I think it was over the summer, where he came in and was a little surprised to find out that Texas Tech did not teach run blocking schemes for the offensive line. They just kind of relied on the passing game being effective enough to open up the running game, and so he's been able to do that. There's also been some changes with some game management. There were some times, past couple of years really, where he would take really weird timeouts, and then coming out of the timeout, it was like, did they accomplish anything by taking that timeout? Like, they'd call a timeout, and then they would come out and then have like a delay game, or like a delay game on the first play of the game. Just really strange stuff. We're seeing that kind of change a little bit, where he's making smarter decisions with timeouts. He's getting onto the team a little bit. He's showing some emotion on the sidelines, which is kind of new for him, and really being a motivational guy on the sidelines instead of just so heavily involved with just calling the next play.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that run game, because that kind of leads into another thing that I wanted to ask you about, that run game and Kevin Johns coming in there, and because it's something that happened at West Virginia about 2 or 3 years ago, back 2015, 2016, and Dana Holgorsen kind of did the same thing, and he revamped the offense a little bit more to focus on the run game, to try and become more balanced and maybe not move at such a rapid pace on offense, and in an attempt to kind of possess the ball more and control the game, as well as kind of help the defense out and not have them be on the field so much, and help their endurance a little bit as well. And I've noticed that Texas Tech, like you said, they've changed the run game, and I think it's made them more balanced, and they've really done a great job of possessing the ball this year. As they ranked 5th in the country in time of possession, and they're actually first among all Power 5 teams in time of possession. So would you say that change and that revamp in the offense is kind of similar to that West Virginia did a few years ago, and that they did it just to kind of help out the whole team more as a whole, and hopefully lead to more success and possibly more wins?
Yeah, certainly. This time of possession thing is just really blowing the Red Raider fans' minds. I don't know if you saw the stats from the Oklahoma State game. Texas Tech passed the ball for nearly 42 minutes of that game, and that's just so much of a change from previous years, because starting back, even with the offensive coordinator under Tommy Tuberville, it was go fast, like as fast as you can. And then your defense would just get left out to dry. They're on the field for 40 minutes, the inverse of what we saw this past weekend against Oklahoma State, and they were just they would fade late in games. So we've seen a little bit more through the running game, a little bit more of a ball control, and not that Texas Tech doesn't still go up-tempo at times, but it just seems to be more they do it to control the game instead of just to go as fast as they can. It's something that has definitely helped the offense and the defense as they continue to improve. And I think that's one of the biggest things we've seen on defense this year is they're not having to be on the field as much. They only defended, I think, 60 plays against Oklahoma State, where Texas Tech ran like 95. So it's definitely helping on the defense, and trying to just limit the possessions that your defense has to defend and how long they're on the field, all those kind of things. That's definitely a change this year with the new offensive coordinator, Kevin Johns.
Absolutely, all good things there, I think, and I think it's helped the team out a lot, as I mentioned, with the time of possession. And tailing off that and flipping over to kind of the defensive side of things, I know you mentioned a while ago that Cliff Kingsbury kind of hired some of his friends in the beginning, and I think that Dana Holgorsen did that as well when he first became coach at West Virginia, especially on the defensive side of things, and he really didn't put much of a focus on that, just kind of hired some guys he knew and let them do their thing. And in the first about 3 years of his tenure, it caused a lot of struggle on that side of the ball. And then in 2014, he brought in West Virginia native Tony Gibson to run the defense and let him install the 3-3-5 scheme that WVU had traditionally run in the past, as well as basically giving him full autonomy over how to run it and to be able to get the type of players that he felt would fit the system. And it's really made a big difference for WVU defensively, and that continuity of being able to keep him around and running the same system and recruit and develop players that are tailor-made to that system has really paid dividends. And I think Cliff Kingsbury made a similar move a few years ago when he brought in David Gibbs, and the Texas Tech defense has improved drastically ever since, especially if you look back at last season when it really went up a lot and has continued, I think. And do you believe the continuity of getting David Gibbs in there and him being there for a few years now and being able to build it up and develop it the way that he sees fit has helped to see that steady improvement that we've seen from Texas Tech defensively?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look back, going all the way back to the Mike Leach, the last couple of years of Mike Leach, I don't know how much it was kind of talked about around the country, around the conference, but Texas Tech was going through basically a new defensive coordinator every year from 2009 until they hired David Gibbs. So it wasn't just a Kingsbury issue. Tommy Tuberville had 3 defensive coordinators in his 3 years. Kingsbury had his first defensive coordinator was a linebacker coach from A&M when he was the offensive coordinator there. The guy that succeeded him the second year was already on the staff. And then they were able to get David Gibbs. And it's not that this is a scheme that Texas Tech has built or has had previous success with. It's more of like a hybrid 3-4 defense, and it's not something that Texas Tech has run or had much success with in the past, but he's been here now 4 seasons, so he's been able to recruit to this system and have 4 recruiting cycles to build the team how he wants it. So I think the biggest thing you'll see is the players aren't as undersized as they were in previous years. I think that was a Tommy Tuberville thing where he was going to build a defense around speed, and that sacrificed a lot of size. David Gibbs has been able to kind of turn that around a little slowly. The size at especially linebacker and then length at corner has been, I think, 2 of the big areas that he's focused on. But definitely having Gibbs around for his 4th season now has really helped take this defense where it's at now from the history of Texas Tech is replacing its defensive coordinator every year for almost a decade.
Absolutely, and you've seen a lot of that steady improvement going back to last season, and it led to high expectations coming into this season for that Texas Tech defense. And I think after that first game against Ole Miss, some of those expectations kind of turned into question marks for a lot of people. But ever since then, it appears as if that defense has gotten steadily better with each passing game, especially if you look at what they did last game against Oklahoma State. And in that game, safety Deshaun Johnson made his season debut after recovering from injury. Do you think that his return to the lineup was kind of the missing piece of the puzzle for that defense? And is it possibly why they played their best game yet, especially there in the secondary?
It certainly didn't hurt. He's been on the sideline the entire season, but I think with his absence, they were starting 2 basically new safeties back there. One was a transfer over the offseason from the University of Texas, and then a JUCO guy that was a rotational guy last season. And Johnson was able to have a presence on the sideline and coach him up, but only in the breaks and not when they're on the field. Him coming back this past weekend, I would say definitely helped. Just bring a little bit more of a calming presence back there. Everybody's a little more confident with him on the back end, especially directing and making sure everybody is lining up how they're supposed to and getting to their reads. So, yeah, I would say definitely that Deshaun Johnson coming back was a big a big help for the game this past weekend against Oklahoma State.
Absolutely. Continuing the talk about players with injury, in y'all's season opening game, you lost your starting quarterback at the time, McLean Carter, to an injury, and that brought in freshman Alan Bowman, and a lot of people were kind of questioning that decision. From what I've heard, a lot of people wanted to see Jet Duffy come in there, but Alan Bowman has really burst onto the scene and quieted those doubters very quickly, going undefeated as a starter as well as leading the Big 12 in total offense and passing yards. And he's doing it as a freshman, much like Patrick Mahomes did back in 2014 for Texas Tech. Do you see any similarities between Patrick Mahomes and Alan Bowman as far as playing style? And do you think Alan Bowman's ceiling is as high of that as Patrick Mahomes?
The similarities I would draw between those two players, I think, is just their calming presence. Bowman hasn't shown where he gets rattled. He threw his first 2 interceptions of the season this past weekend against Oklahoma State. One was he didn't go through his reads properly, and he overthrew a receiver over the middle. Another one was, it was a little bit on Bowman where he threw the ball, but it was also a really good play from the defensive back. But he was able to rebound and not be rattled by that. So I think if you're going to make any kind of comparison between the two, it would be there, because they have very different styles. Bowman's he makes really quick reads and throws it real quick. Not one to run around like Patrick Mahomes. Doesn't have the arm strength of Mahomes, but his emergence, from the Ole Miss game, you're right. We were expecting to see Jet Duffy in that situation. It actually showed him on the sideline getting pumped up. He was warming up his arm. He put his helmet on. We're like, okay, here comes Duffy. And then the offense runs out, and Duffy turns around and goes back to the sideline. We're like, what's going on? So, Bowman coming out and taking over that role as the backup quarterback, essentially, was definitely a surprise. And then his just constant progression from the Ole Miss game, where he was a little shaky. He didn't really have the best grasp of the offense. Wasn't really prepared to take that responsibility on. He came in. He played a half against Lamar. He came out of the game where Texas Tech was up 42-0. He played the whole game against Houston, where he set the Big 12 passing record for a freshman. And then, he went on the road, his first true road game to Stillwater, where he did have his 2 interceptions, but he still completed 74% of his passes for nearly 400 yards. So he's just been a real bright spot in the offense for, having lost your starting quarterback, a quarter into your season.
Absolutely, and definitely been very impressive for being only a true freshman. And that's something else I kind of want to ask you about, is that him being a true freshman, and he's performed very well. And there's actually a lot of players for Texas Tech who seem to be very young but making a lot of plays. You got Sir Roderick Thompson and Tejon Henry, both freshman running backs who have had good games so far and shown a lot of potential. And then TJ Vasher, who I know is kind of questionable to play in this game against West Virginia, but he's also only a sophomore and has made some very big plays. And then on the defensive side of the ball as well, you got a cornerback in Adrian Fry, who's only a freshman but has already proved to be a playmaker, as he has 3 interceptions in the first 4 games of this season. So with young players like that contributing and making plays on both sides of the ball, you got to think there's a lot of potential for this program going forward in the future, don't you?
Yeah, it's not that the senior depth on this team isn't talented. We're just so happy to see some of the young guys being able to bolster that depth. The true freshman running backs, I think, were kind of pushed into service out of necessity, because the running back that started this season, Daleon Ward, may or may not be available. The second string guy, Trey King, hasn't played this season. And then you got the third string guy was DeMarcus Felton. He had a really good game in Oklahoma at Oklahoma State, but he actually announced earlier this summer that he was going to be transferring. The coaching staff was able to convince him to stay, and then he's been able to do this. And then the other 2 running backs, like you mentioned, Tejon Henry, Roderick Thompson, are both true freshmen. So Texas Tech has been running with their 3rd, 4th, and 5th string running backs and done fairly well with them. TJ Vasher really has exploded onto the season late, or in the scene late last season. I think one of his first big games was actually there in Morgantown against your Mountaineers. He's shown some big playability, but his is more like the fantastic catches, whereas the receiver opposite him, Antoine Wesley, he's a junior, so he's not really a younger guy, has been more of the yardage receiver. And then, like you mentioned, Adrian Fry, he redshirted last year. I think the defensive staff was really excited to get him on the field, and he's just really shown his ability to create turnovers. Like you said, he's got three interceptions, and then there was an interception against Houston that Adrian Fry actually tipped the ball and was intercepted by somebody else. So he's been a part of 4 turnovers. He's just really shown his ability to be around the ball and to make the plays when they're there. Just really happy to see like that kind of progression with the young guys that are not playing because they have to, but because they're just, you can't keep them off the field because of their talent.
Absolutely, it definitely bodes well for the future to see a lot of young playmakers over there, I think. And getting more into this matchup specifically and kind of the specifics of it, there's some concern among the WVU fans that West Virginia has only faced teams primarily this year that run the ball first and are run first teams. And it'll be the first time that their secondary is truly tested against a great passing offense, as well as being their first true road game of this season, the first early kickoff time for them this season, and their first time facing a ranked opponent this season. So a string of firsts for the Mountaineers this season will be occurring in this game. And do you think that any of those, or maybe all of those, add up to a distinct advantage for Texas Tech in this contest?
The first, let's just say like the first morning game of the season, I think I mentioned this with you on the phone the other night, that Texas Tech and West Virginia, since Kingsbury's been the head coach, has always played at 11 a.m. So, I'm going to go ahead and apologize to you guys for that. That's totally Texas Tech fault. Not been good enough to garner the afternoon games, although you would think this matchup would be probably one of the better ones that this series has seen. Even when you go back to West Virginia being ranked 5th when they came in, I think the first year in 2012, Texas Tech was not expected to be a part of that game at all. I do think the passing game may be a little bit of an advantage for Texas Tech because, like you were mentioning, West Virginia hasn't seen that yet. The thing where I think West Virginia may be able to negate that a little bit is that Bowman does move through his reads fairly quickly. He's looking at maybe 1 or 2 receivers. When he goes downfield, it's just I'm going to throw it to either TJ Vasher or Antoine Wesley and just hope they make a play. It's not like they're breaking free a whole lot and getting behind the defense. They're just Bowman's throwing the ball up and they're just making fantastic catches. Running game has been getting better. I think the best we've seen was this past week against Oklahoma State. They were inventive and creative on their play calling. I just don't know how that's going to turn out against West Virginia. So I think it's a mixed bag there in terms of advantage that Texas Tech may have and those that West Virginia may have this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a tough one to predict because it's I've mentioned in the past it's going to be a good barometer game for both teams to see where they're at, and it's going to be a matchup of strength on strengths, as West Virginia has shown a strong defense thus far this season, but they haven't really been tested, and of course going up against that Texas Tech offense currently sitting in the top of the country in total offense and in passing offense. That being said, we usually like to give a little prediction here on the preview show and, maybe predict the score a little bit or what we think is going to happen in this game. I know right now I think West Virginia is favored by 3.5 points, maybe 4. It's somewhere in there, but you care to offer up a prediction to see what do you think is going to happen Saturday in Lubbock?
So this game is so hard to project, right? Because the over/under I think it's 77 or something in that area. I don't know how the defense is going to react and perform against an offense like West Virginia. Everybody before West Virginia, I mean, when we played Ole Miss, they were able to get their yards both in the air and the ground. Lamar couldn't do anything, but they're FCS. Houston was able to get through the air a little bit, but their quarterback was not built to be throwing deep balls and coming from behind. Same thing with Oklahoma State. Once you kind of figured out Taylor Cornelius can't throw accurately down the field, and Texas Tech was able to get a lead, they were forcing some throws there. So they haven't faced an offense like West Virginia yet, and so I don't know how that's gonna turn out. I do think, the line being as close as it is at 3.5, I do think it's just going to be a really entertaining game. It could be back and forth. I would expect it to be a close game. I don't think, if anybody's going to run away with this game, I think it would be West Virginia and not Texas Tech. So if Texas Tech's going to win this game, I think it's going to have to be a close game. I just don't know if the defense is in a place to be able to stop the offensive firepower that is, West Virginia, Will Greer, Jennings, Sills, all those guys. So, I optimistically for Texas Tech, I would say that they can cover. But I think realistically, this is going to probably play out for a West Virginia win, unless we're able to win the turnover battle and be on the plus side of that. Besides that, it's going to be a real test for Texas Tech to be able to beat West Virginia even here at home.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's going to be. It's hard to. It's a game that's kind of hard to project. I feel like, and I think it's going to be back and forth, and it kind of depends on what type of game it is as to who comes out on top. I think if it's a game that's in the 30s, that's to West Virginia's advantage, and if it gets into more of a shootout, that may actually be in Texas Tech's advantage. But I think it's a game that it could come down to whoever has the ball last may end up winning, and I don't see it being more than maybe a 7-point game and probably a 1-score game either way.
Yeah, and the thing with these games, I mean, I think they've been within 1 or 2 scores for most of this series. I think the final score was like 11-point difference last season, where West Virginia was able to mount a really impressive comeback very late. I just don't think, to your point, that it's going to be. I don't think there's going to be a big spread there between who wins and loses this game, unless West Virginia is able to provide a lot of defensive pressure, really throw Alan Bowman off. Kind of like the game, what was it, 2016 against Mahomes, whatever it was, where it was like 41-7 or whatever that game was, where we were just off the entire game. So I would expect a close game. I do think experience is going to win up here with like I said, the weapons you guys have on offense, your disruptive defense against a true freshman quarterback. But I'm looking forward to a really entertaining game this weekend, and hopefully for me and my team is able to be an upset poll, but just really interested to see how this plays out this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. That being said, I really appreciate you coming on. If you want to, go ahead and tell our listeners where they can find your podcast, the 23 Personnel Podcast, and your social media handles if you'd like, and just where they can listen to your all side of this preview that you released earlier today. And really thank you for being on the show, Spencer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. If you want us to check out our episode, we released it, I think, late last night or this morning. We're on Apple Podcasts there, or just 23 Personnel Podcast. On Twitter, it's at 23 Personnel. My personal Twitter, I've actually haven't been on that one too much the past few weeks, but it's at Punts Suck. It's 2 S's there in the middle there.
I like that.
It's good because we were having some real struggles with punting a couple years ago, and it just really stuck. The whole kicking game for Texas Tech is kind of a nightmare. Maybe getting better, we'll see, but our episode, like I said, released I think this morning. The West Virginia preview of it is about halfway through it. We went really long on the episode this week, but if you're interested to hear our take on it and the interview that we did with you, Jordan, I think it starts right on the 40-minute mark or so. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and good luck this weekend.
Absolutely. Good luck to you as well. All right, so great interview there with Spencer from the 23 Personnel Podcast, covering Texas Tech athletics, and gives us a really good insight into this Texas Tech football team and kind of a more in-depth preview of this game coming up on Saturday. And, you should go listen to their show. It was a really great show. They had me on there as a guest on the 23 Personnel podcast, and I've already listened to it, and it's really excellent interview and a great podcast that they've got going there. So check them out if you get a chance. That being said, let's talk about my prediction for this game.
It's that time. It's prediction time.
As I mentioned on the interview with Spencer, I've kind of found this one as a hard one to predict. I know a lot of Mountaineer fans have that 2012 game against Texas Tech in the back of their mind, just because kind of the eerie similarities that they're lining up when you look at this one in comparison to that game, as West Virginia had a quarterback in the Heisman conversation then, as they do now as well. They were ranked highly in the country. I think they were ranked 5th then. They're coming in ranked 12th in this game, and it was, I think that was not their first road game of the season. They'd already played at Texas, but it was a road game in Lubbock, and it was an early kickoff, as this one's going to be as well, and this one will be West Virginia's first road game. So a lot of similarities there are making Mountaineer fans kind of nervous, but I think that on the positive side of that, aside from those things, this isn't the same West Virginia team from 2012 by any means. That West Virginia team was great on offense, but their defense really struggled a lot, and that was before you had Tony Gibson here as defensive coordinator, and when he ended up taking over 2 years later. And so I think the defense is going to give West Virginia a bit of an advantage in this one. And I think the other thing that West Virginia has going for them in this one is Tony Gibson and his 3-3-5 scheme confuses quarterbacks a lot when it's their first time facing it. And as I mentioned with Spencer, Texas Tech does have a true freshman quarterback in Alan Bowman, and he's never seen this 3-3-5 defense, and it's an exotic scheme that can cause confusion and disguise coverages and bring blitzes from places you're not expecting. And so I think that's to West Virginia's advantage. Is Tony Gibson is 6-2 in his 8 games when he's facing a quarterback that hasn't seen his defense before, so that it's going to go to West Virginia's advantage in this one. I think West Virginia has an offense that could do well if this game does get into a shootout, but I think that it'd be more of an advantage for West Virginia to not allow this game to get into a shootout and kind of maybe try and run the ball more, better than they have thus far this season at least, and try and possess the ball a little bit more and slow it down and keep Texas Tech's offense off the field, because I'm just not sold on West Virginia's secondary yet. They haven't really been tested, and they've given up some big pass plays in the games that they have played, and those haven't been great passing offenses. Granted, maybe they were keen on the run, and that's why they've been on play action and things like that. But hopefully the West Virginia secondary surprises me in this game and comes out and really proves people wrong that have been questioning them, but not completely sold on them, and I think that that's an area that causes some concern in this game. And so I think West Virginia possessing the ball would do them well in this game. And their offense is good to get into a shootout, and they can still perform well in this game. But I think if you want to see West Virginia win, they want to probably try and keep this game into the 30s and not get into a shootout with Texas Tech and the offense that they have. I mentioned earlier the revamped running game, and that just adds another dimension to that Texas Tech offense to make it even more lethal. That being said, I think the West Virginia defense and its improvements are going to be the advantage in this one. And I think that they're hungry to continue to show how much they've improved, especially in a game going up against a good offense. And I'm sure that they're hearing a lot of talk of people saying that, they haven't been tested yet, and this is really their first test, and they haven't played anyone. And I think the defense may use that as motivation in this one and come out hungry and get a few early stops and maybe get out to an early lead on Texas Tech, and then from there hopefully control the ball more and hang on to that lead. But I think it's going to be a back and forth game, and any lead that you have against an offense like the one Texas Tech has isn't necessarily safe. But I think Tony Gibson's a great motivator, and he'll use that as a motivation tactic and have this defense ready, and I think they'll get a few key stops and be able to get off the field on third down. And as I mentioned, may confuse true freshman quarterback Alan Bowman some with the 3-3-5 scheme, and hopefully maybe cause a couple turnovers, which West Virginia hasn't really done a lot this year. And I think that may end up being the difference for West Virginia, is that defense, and it being the first time Alan Bowman's seeing a 3-3-5 scheme. And for my prediction in this one, I'll say West Virginia wins it 38-31 in a close game down there in Lubbock. So that will pretty much wrap up our Game 4 preview here on the Country Roads Webcast, brought to you by Trio 4 Productions. I really appreciate Spencer from the 23 Personnel podcast to come on to the show and give us a little bit more insight into Texas Tech and to help us preview this game coming up Saturday in Lubbock. number 12 West Virginia will take on number 25 Texas Tech, and that is a noon kickoff Eastern time, and it will be televised on ESPN2 for those of you that do not know. And so really looking forward to this game, and I think it's going to be a really good barometer game for West Virginia's defense and West Virginia's team as a whole. And I think it's the same case for Texas Tech as well. Good barometer game for them to see where they are, as they've kind of started off hot like this in the past, and I think that they're eager to see if this Texas Tech team is different and not going to fall off as the season goes on, as well as West Virginia is eager to see if this defense is for real. So it's a good barometer game to see just where both teams are at, and I'm really looking forward to it there Saturday in Lubbock. That being said, this has been the Country Roads Webcast, brought to you by Trio 4 Productions. Be sure and give us a follow on our Twitter page, as we will be providing updates leading up to this game, as well as live tweets during the game. And you can find us on Twitter by searching our handle at WVU Country Roads. And we hope to see a Mountaineer win on Saturday in Lubbock. As always, I'm your host, Jordan Cruz, and until next time, let's go Mountaineers.
Country road.